Okay, I want you all to think of a time when you did something really rash and impulsive, when you did something entirely on a whim without any forethought or rational contemplation. All right, you're thinking about it? Whatever it is you came up with, I bet mine is bigger and crazier. 14 years ago, I bought a farm. Now, before that, my wife Gillian and I were normal urban professionals. We lived in downtown Toronto, we had good jobs, a nice house, a couple of really young kids, and then one day we just kind of lost it and we bought a farm. I honestly can't remember what we were thinking at the time, but suffice it to say we had no plan, no experience, and not much of a clue. When we moved to the farm in 2004, we started a garden and we started growing food for our family and we started giving away all the surplus food we grew to our friends and neighbors. And after a year or two, we came up with the brilliant idea of actually farming the land we were living on. We started selling in the farmers market in the nearby village of Creemore. Then we started selling to restaurants in Toronto. And the farm grew slowly and very painfully until it became a full-time job for both of us. Now, our farm has evolved over the years, but from the very beginning, we had a few defining attributes. We were small, we were organic, we grew a huge diversity of vegetables, and we sold everything we produced locally rather than shipping it far and wide. This seemed like a logical plan to us when we started, but the more we got to know our farm neighbors, the more we realized that our farm was a freakish aberration on the local landscape. All of our neighbors were growing commodity crops using huge machinery and lots of chemicals, and they sold their output on the international market. Our neighbor Bill, who lived down the road, told us that he would wake up every morning and check the soybean futures on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange so he could forward sell his crop 2 years before he actually grew it if the price was right. As urban transplants and beginner farmers, these types of conversations made us feel very small and very unsophisticated. Our farm neighbors were also curious about what we were doing. That's not true. Our farm neighbors thought we were crazy and listened. They listened with morbid fascination as we tried to explain the delusional type of agriculture we were practicing. I would very earnestly describe what I thought were the benefits of small-scale organic farming, but time and again, I would get shut down by one simple argument. The farmers we talked to were always very polite, but they knew they could shut us up with conventional agriculture's knockout punch. What you're doing won't feed the world. Now, in the early years, this argument was really terrifying to us. Maybe they were right, we thought. Maybe the type of farming we were promoting would lead to mass starvation. Which is worrying, of course. This notion that the primary goal of conventional agriculture is to feed the world was something that the farmers we talked to had obviously deeply internalized. They would often talk about the chemicals and machinery they used as a kind of necessary evil. We don't love spraying all the time and burning so much diesel, but we have to if we want to feed the world. This message is propagated and reinforced by the big agricultural companies that dominate our farming system. Their constant references to the growing world population, to the ever-increasing number of mouths we have to feed, with more and more people sharing our planet, we simply need more food. Now, Gillian and I are big walkers. We would often go on long walks from the farm, and we would talk about this big idea. And we would also observe the large-scale industrial farming system that dominates the landscape all around us. As the years went by, our walks got longer and longer, but no matter how far we ventured, the landscape looked the same in every direction. What we saw were huge fields growing just 5 crops: corn, soy, wheat, canola, and hay. Let me show you what I mean. This is what our farm looks like today. This is taken in the spring when our crops were just starting to grow. All of our gardens together total about 20 acres. If we zoom out a bit, we see our immediate neighbors. Each one of their fields is bigger than our whole garden area. The field across the street from us grows corn one year and soy the next, year after year. If we zoom out more, we see some fields that are 10 times as big as our whole operation, 200 acres or more of just one crop. But even at this scale, it's still just corn, soy, wheat, canola, and hay. We could keep zooming out, but the story would be the same all over North America. Vast stretches of the continent being dominated by just a few crops. Now, we started to wonder on these long walks just where all this food was going. If the goal of the industrial farming system is to feed the world, what exactly is the world being fed? It didn't take a whole lot of research to figure out the answer. Virtually everything that was being grown in our neighborhood was being used to make three things: meat, sugar, and processed food. We couldn't wander into any of the fields we passed on our walks and pick something and eat it. None of the corn that was growing in those huge fields was the kind of corn that you roll in butter. It was all destined to make animal feed and high fructose corn syrup. Think about this the next time you're driving past a farmer's field. If you were to stop the car and walk into that field, would there be anything there that you could actually eat? No matter where you are in North America, the answer will almost always be no. Virtually everything that's grown on a typical North American farm must be fed to animals or processed before it can be eaten. That's when Gillian and I started to really question this assertion we kept hearing, that industrial farming is necessary to feed the world. It's easy to agree when a farmer or a big agricultural company says the world needs more food. But what if they said the world needs more meat, sugar, and processed food? That doesn't sound quite as compelling. Does anybody really think that the world needs more meat, sugar, and processed food? What if we began to think all of the problems associated with our current food system, the environmental, the economic, the health problems, what if they weren't a necessary evil that we have to accept in order to produce enough food, but were instead a consequence of producing too much food and too much of the wrong kind of food? That's when things started to make sense. It turns out there's a huge global surplus of food. Recommendations for daily calorie intake vary according to your age, your gender, how active you are, where you live. If we take the US Department of Agriculture numbers, moderately active adult men should eat about 2,600 calories per day and 2,000 for women. If we average out the recommendations for kids and older people on a global level, we get a rough figure of 2,100 calories per person per day. That's the optimum. But according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, in 2013, there were almost 2,900 calories available for every woman, man, and child on the planet. That's a 37% surplus of calories. And these figures are for food available at the household level, that's bought, paid for, ready to eat. This doesn't even account for the huge amount of food that is wasted before it gets to our homes. Now, you might be thinking that these figures are skewed by massive overconsumption in rich countries, but in Africa, a continent we often associate with hunger and malnutrition, there were over 2,600 calories available for every citizen, well over the average daily requirements. So after years of farming and observing what was happening in our own neighborhood and researching what was happening at a global level, we came to a simple conclusion. We're producing too much food, and too much of the wrong kind of food: meat, sugar, and processed food. So what are the consequences of that? The first is simple. Our food system is making us fat and sick. According to the British medical journal The Lancet, obesity now kills 3 times as many people as malnutrition. And again, this is no longer just a first world problem. More than 1 in 10 Africans are now obese. The rate for Latin Americans is almost 1 in 4. This is leading to an epidemic of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and other diet-related illness that's sweeping across the globe with massive economic and public health consequences. Overproduction of food is also having overwhelming environmental consequences. There are huge dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico and the South China Sea caused primarily by agricultural runoff, where the only thing that can survive are jellyfish. On land, agriculture is by far the biggest driver of habitat loss, which is causing mass extinction. The rapidly increasing use of systemic pesticides like neonicotinoids is wiping out insects and invertebrates at the bottom of the food chain, leading to disruption at the scale of whole ecosystems. Too much food means that food is cheap, which has all sorts of economic consequences. The average Canadian farm loses money year after year. Razor-thin or negative margins have pushed farmers to get bigger and bigger, to use bigger machinery, more chemicals, and less labor to try to get by. Rural North America has been depopulated as farm sizes increased and farm jobs have disappeared. Cheap food at the household level means more food waste. Some research have estimated that up to half the food we grow never gets eaten. When food is so cheap, we simply don't value it. But the impact of overproduction that I'm most concerned about is the impact on our climate. The role of our food system in climate change is hard to overstate. By most estimates, animal agriculture alone produces more greenhouse gases than transportation. Think about that. Raising animals for meat puts more CO2, methane, and other heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere than all the planes, trains, and automobiles on the planet. Now, I want to stress that hunger and malnutrition are still big problems. But as we've seen, we have a global surplus of food. Hunger and malnutrition are political problems caused by poverty, inequality, and armed conflict. We won't do anything to solve our hunger problem by increasing the food supply. On the contrary, the combination of poverty and abundant cheap calories has given rise to a new and rapidly growing problem: people who are both obese and malnourished at the same time. When we understand that we have too much food, all of the problems of our food system make sense. And the central role of food in so many of the big pressing issues we face becomes clear. Now, this is a long list of problems. It would be really easy to look at this list and become hopelessly depressed, but we can also see this list as an opportunity. If food is so central to so many problems, then changing the food system can help us address all of these problems all at the same time. So what can we do? To start, we need to fundamentally change our mindset. As human beings, we're hardwired to think that we always need more food, but that's no longer the case. We don't need more food. We don't need more food at an individual level or at a global level. We need less food, but more importantly, we need different food. We need better food. As an individual consumer, you can have an impact on the entire food system simply by what you choose to buy and eat. The first step is simple: eat less meat. If we all ate less meat, we would improve human health, we'd slow down climate change, but we'd also free up millions of acres of farmland that are currently growing animal feed to grow healthier foods, which is the best way to feed a growing population. If you do eat meat, choose grass-fed and organic. Okay, what else? We need to eat more fruits and vegetables, and again, choose local and organic. We need to eat less sugar. Now, I know you're sitting there and thinking, I'm starting to sound like your mother. I apologize. But the great thing about this prescription is that whatever's good for you is also good for the planet. Now, I'm going to say something else that my mother at least would never say. Don't be afraid to pay more for food. When we buy cheap food, the true cost of that food is borne by farmers, by farm workers, by the environment, and by our own bodies. North Americans spend less of their income on food than any other society in history. Good food is more expensive. We can and should pay more. Individual actions like these are important, but they're not enough. We also need to work collectively to change food policy at the local and national levels. Sugar is harmful and addictive. It should be taxed. We need an aggressive public health campaign to encourage people to eat less meat. We need to end the subsidies that encourage overproduction of commodity crops, especially, and I haven't talked about this yet, but it's very important, we need to end subsidies and mandates for corn ethanol, which is very costly, consumes millions of acres of farmland, and has zero environmental benefit. We need to support farmers as they transition to more sustainable methods and convert to organic production. Switching to more sustainable farming methods is not easy or cheap, and it won't happen without public support. Now, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, small-scale farmers in the developing world, most of them women, already produce the majority of the world's food. The truth is that industrial agriculture doesn't feed the world. Small family farms do. We need to support these small farmers so that they can meet the continuing challenge of growing good food for all. Now, Gillian and I have come a long way since we packed up and moved out of the city more than a dozen years ago. Our farm is still small and organic, but it's also profitable. We've paid down all our debt. Our farm is our family's sole source of income, and we also provide jobs for 9 full-time seasonal employees. This year, we'll produce well over 500,000 servings of fresh organic vegetables on our little 20-acre farm. Our farm is still an aberration, but in a good way. We think we found a viable alternative to industrial agriculture, and our farm is far from unique. All across the food system, we're starting to see positive change. If you're a chef, a food entrepreneur, a foodie, an aspiring farmer, or just a plain old eater, you have a role to play in changing the food system. You have a role to play in making the change we need Start now. Thank you.